Hello and welcome to Hawkeye Nation. This is HawkCast, your Iowa football, basketball, and recruiting podcast brought to you by Hawkeye Beacon and Rivals.com. I'm your recruiting analyst and host, Eliot Clough, at Eliot Clough on Twitter, joined as always by Adam Jacoby and Ross Binder here to preview the season. We're breaking down every single game ahead of Iowa here in 2024. 10 wins might be that threshold where we're talking about if people are satisfied with this year or not. Looking at that defense, the hopes for the offense, even though the quarterback situation is still definitely a question mark, which, by the way, we are running a deal right now. 70% off premium subscription for the entire first year. That's 70% off. You're only paying 30% of what people typically pay for our premium subscriptions. And we got intel on the quarterback situation. We got intel on the offensive line, the wide receivers, everything on the offensive side of the ball, plus recruiting, plus more. So go check that out. We got all that intel on football recruiting, basketball recruiting, all that on our board and our premium content. Again, you can sign up today with code HawkCamp at iowa.rivals.com. HawkCamp, or you can find there's links in all the free articles. There's links on our Twitters. You get the autofill. You click it. You get 70% off for your first year at iowa.rivals.com.
And today is the day.
That's true.
It ends today, Tuesday, August 13th. If you're hearing this on Wednesday the 14th, you already missed it. Sorry about that. But also, like Eliot said, it has been all over our Twitters. It has been all over the site. It's right there on the front page. So if you're hearing this on Tuesday, August 13th, you are still not signed up for some reason, not hard to find. Promo code HawkCamp, 70% off the entire first year. An unbelievable steal. Guys, it's even one better than 69%. That's unbelievable.
Nice.
Now that's a nice deal, Adam.
We've already had people flock into that deal, so make sure you join them. Don't miss that. Again, that's today. We are publishing right after we're done with the pod, so you can hear that, get that done, get signed up with us, get all that premium content for 70% off your first year. Again, if you're watching on YouTube, you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, make sure you smash that subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. And if you're on YouTube as well, drop a like, drop a comment, let us know what you're thinking about the season. What's your season record prediction ahead? Drop that in the comments. Maybe you'll agree with us, maybe you won't. We'll see. So we want to get started here. Illinois State, week 1. They also play Troy week 2. We're going to kind of fly over those because, well, they're probably going to be wins. Of course, nothing guaranteed. We remember the South Dakota State game a couple years ago. We remember the North Dakota State game a few years ago. Too soon, sorry. Illinois State, week 1, August 31st in Kinnick Stadium. Illinois State is the number 20 team in the FCS. And as I told Ross before we started recording, they are in the MVFC, which is the SEC of the FCS. So an absolutely loaded conference there. They played, UNI last year. UNI beat them 24-21. They went 6-5 last season, which is pretty typical at that back end of those rankings. Typical 6-5, 7-4, MVFC team in the FCS. So they're not something to look past. They've got a few FBS transfers. One from Western Michigan, who's a tight end, an offensive tackle from Minnesota, and then a quarterback from Kansas State, who you have to assume is going to be vying for some time there. So Illinois State, of course, you're going to rack that up as a win when you look at the schedule, but they're a good FCS team.
Yeah, and at this point, especially with the uncertainty that's surrounding the Iowa football offense in particular, surrounding the quarterback position, and again, like Eliot said, we've got some premium intel on the press box premium board. So make sure you're subscribed. If you haven't already read it, you are going to want to read it. But until there's a little bit more consistency, a little bit more production, just a little bit more clarity in terms of where that QB situation is, is it going to be Brendan Sullivan? Probably not going to be a week 1 starter, but are we going to see a lot of him on the field? Are we going to see more touch accuracy, a better rapport from Cade McNamara and his receivers? That's really going to be the big question that's facing Iowa in this game, much more than are they going to win? Are they going to lose? Because probably they'll be favored in that like mid upper 20 point range. And we have seen Iowa play it really close to the vest in these early season games. They don't open up the playbook if they don't have to. And frankly, we know that Kirk Ferentz does not care about margin of victory, and he especially doesn't care at the beginning of the season. So this one might stay close. And, if Iowa fans have been around long enough, they know that the week one games do typically stay closer than, frankly, a lot of them would hope they are. But ultimately, yeah, the big questions are going to surround Iowa's personnel, Iowa's offense. Where is that execution level as they get into the tougher parts of the schedule? So that to me is really the big question. And especially after what we saw at the Kids Day, Cade McNamara's got 3 weeks to improve from that. And that is how much he improves is going to play a huge role in determining how safe his job is in this QB competition.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the potential spread of, 20 plus points, Adam. How many defensive touchdowns does Iowa need to score to cover that spread?
Well, fortunately, the Doughboys, the Ball Hawks, I think they're probably, I shouldn't say probably, there's a pretty darn good chance they'll get at least one.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what you and Eliot said. Like Illinois State, solid FCS team. Obviously, they're ranked. Brought in some FBS transfers, so they're going to have some talent there in the starting lineup. You would expect, but this is not one of those elite national title contending FCS teams like South Dakota State a couple years ago, like North Dakota State in the game that shall not be mentioned, but we've already mentioned it twice, so we failed. So, I mean, I think there is cause for a little bit of concern just because you don't want to chalk up any game as that's a win, no questions asked. But of all the games on Iowa's schedule, this is definitely the one you should have the least amount of worry for. Like on a talent level, Iowa should be far superior to Illinois State. And with that Iowa defense, the question is how much is Illinois State going to be able to move the ball on Iowa? It seems like that should be a real struggle for the Redbirds. So then, the question is, how effective can Iowa's offense be? Based on what we saw or what you guys saw in the Kids Day, obviously long ways to go. But between the fact that there's 3 weeks, 2.5 weeks now until this game happens, and that it is an FCS opponent, it is an FCS defense. I think you have to have a little confidence that the offense can find a few things that'll work well enough that Iowa will win this game.
One more little quick thing to add here. Old friends of the Big Ten will recognize Illinois State head coach Brock Spack, formerly of Purdue, formerly of the Joe Tiller regime over there, still rocking an absolutely glorious mustache. So at the very least, the visitor sideline at Kinnick Stadium for week one will have quite the flavor saver leading the pack there. So does that have anything to do with the actual football? Of course not. But you can't let a mustache like that slide. That's all. Sorry for interrupting you, Eliot.
As I was saying, talent discrepancy, just like size discrepancy. Iowa's going to have the better athletes. They're going to have the bigger athletes. And that's why we tend to chalk these games up as wins for Iowa. Like you said, Adam, they're going to be conservative in their play calling. They're not going to show too much, but it should be a win. By how much, that's yet to be determined, obviously. Then we're on to week 2, and Iowa hosting Iowa State this year. Cyclones coming off a 7-6 season. Iowa beat them 20-13 at Jack Trice. Expectations are high for the Cyclones this year. They believe they could possibly go out and win a Big 12 title. The real competition, Utah. And then after that, it's kind of a question mark in the Big 12, Kansas State, Kansas. But yeah, I mean, are they worried about BYU? Right? They're not. I can tell you that. Spoiler alert. So expectations are high for the Cyclones this year. I've already heard a couple other podcasts expect and pick the Cyclones to beat Iowa. And I am not on board there for a couple reasons, and I'll share those, and then I'll go to you guys here. Well, first things first, the best quarterback in the program's history never beat Iowa, right? Brock Purdy. And from my Iowa State cohorts, people love to compare Rocco Beck to Brock Purdy. I've heard that a bunch of times, especially in personality. That's one thing. And again, Brock Purdy never beat the Hawkeyes. Two, when Iowa State has high expectations, i.e. the Brock Purdy era, they kind of they didn't fall on their face, but they lose to Iowa. Iowa, in this matchup between the Cyclones, I'm going to quote my buddies from the ANF podcast here because they do awesome work. They know ball. These are some of my buddies. I was on a podcast with them just earlier this summer, if you want to listen to it, talking about the recruiting class of 2024. But effectively what they said is this game is a game of triangle, right? Triangles, which is the defensive front for Iowa back to Jay Higgins. And Iowa is just going to fundamentally be better than Iowa State in that regard. This 3-3-5 defense is really productive against teams in the Big 12, but it's not against Iowa. I think Iowa's going to be able to smash the ball down their throat. What they used last year was counter with Jazz Patterson. And they don't have their best corner anymore. Of course, they've returned a bunch of production, but I don't think these guys are big as strong as what Iowa's got up front. Am I saying Iowa State's a bad football team? I'm not. What I am saying is Iowa's a better football team. So I'm going to pick Iowa here to start the season 2-0.
Yeah, this is going to be a tough one. One, because you don't want to fall back on the cliche of you throw the records out the window, especially when it's going to be week 2. But these two teams, the way they play each other does not always match their relative levels of talent. And Eliot, I agree that Iowa on paper is a better team than Iowa State, but this is just one game. Things often go sideways when these two teams go at it, because ultimately Iowa State fans sort of resent the implication that this is their team's Super Bowl, but this is a game that both teams should be getting as high up as just about any on the entire schedule for every single year, because of how much is riding on it, because of how much pride there is involved, because of how much they know the other team is geared up for it too. We know both teams love beating the other, right? Like that's not even controversial to say. So if this isn't Iowa State Super Bowl, it should be. Like, it's a better idea. So one of the ways that a game can really go sideways is turnovers. And if Iowa can create them against Iowa State, last year in 2023, when ISU turned the ball over, they were 2-5. When they didn't, they were 5-0. I think that pattern is going to continue for this season as well. And yeah, like Rocco Beck, if he can take that leap and, not throw the easiest touchdown of Sebastian Castro's career on a pressured out route like he did at Jack Trice last year, Iowa State can at the very least, run some clock, run some, sustained drives, because they have that sort of offense, and they, their offensive line has been coming for, several years now. But it's good enough that at the very least, I think they'll be able to sustain drives, not necessarily touchdown drives, but I think they'll be able to move the ball a little bit. On the other side of the ball, Iowa will have a little bit more clarity as to where their QB position is coming off of week 1, but ISU's different, Iowa State's defense is going to be better than Illinois State's defense. So if there's some struggle from whoever QB1 is against the Redbirds in week 1, that, especially against this real attacking, real turnover happy defense that ISU's got, that is a situation where this can, if not get out of hand, you can see the balance of the game lurch pretty quickly. But when Iowa does not turn the ball over, and we saw it at Jack Trice last year, that game was well in hand for the Hawkeyes for pretty much the entire thing. 20-13 doesn't really give justice to how much better Iowa was than Iowa State on the field. And I don't think much in the way that, talent coming in, talent coming out, talent progressing. I don't think that balance has shifted very much in this offseason for either team to the point where you can say, well, ISU is the better team on paper. No, they're not. But Iowa has got to take care of business because how many times, Ross, in the last 20 years have we seen Iowa not take care of business? And Iowa's not a great September team to begin with, and have it blow up in their face against these Cyclones.
Yeah, that has definitely happened, far too often. It was a more of a common occurrence in the first half of Ferentz's tenure at Iowa than the second half. I think Iowa's been a lot better against Iowa State over the last 10 or 15 years than they were the first 10 or so years. One thing of interesting or of note heading into this game is that home field has not mattered in this series lately. The road team has won 4 in a row and 5 of 6. So, I don't think the Cyclones are going to be scared of Kinnick in the way some non-conference teams or even some Big Ten teams that maybe don't come to Kinnick all that often might be. They're not going to have that fear factor. They've been here. They won here 2 years ago. So it's like there are guys on that team who are still playing this year. So like they can draw on those memories. I think what you noted the turnovers. That to me is the key. When Iowa has had recent success in this series, it has been heavily around forcing turnovers from Iowa State, often directly leading to scoring. Like we've seen a number of defensive touchdowns from Sebastian Castro, Josie Jewell, other Iowa stalwarts in recent years. And that's been a key for Iowa's victories. So I do think Iowa definitely needs to win the turnover battle. And Cade, Brendan, whoever the quarterback is, has to avoid stupid turnovers, turning the ball over in positions that give Iowa State's offense easy scoring chances, makes things hard for this defense, which I think if Iowa State has to go the length of the field on this defense, I don't anticipate a lot of success for them. But if they get short fields, that can change that calculus. I'm with you both, I think, in the camp of Iowa winning this game. But it is, I think, going to be tighter than we want, especially if the quarterback play doesn't improve dramatically before week 1 and between week 1 and week 2, for that matter. Looks like you wanted to add something there, Adam.
Yeah, what this game really might come down to is special teams, and on that end as well. And we've seen that happen in this rivalry a couple times too. I don't think Iowa State is going to have two guys run into each other on a critical punt return this time around. That was sort of winning the lottery ticket of strange ways to win in this rivalry. But Iowa State is replacing their kicker, and it's with a guy at FAU who hit only 2 of 4 field goals last year. So, in terms of the incumbent talent, the returning talent, I think Iowa's got a pretty substantial advantage. And when you've got these two types of teams that really go at it with each other, match up, I would say, pretty well with each other. If this game stays competitive and it really does come down to a special teams play, I think Iowa's got the advantage there.
I think this is also a game that's a good early test for our belief in the Iowa offensive line and running game. We've highlighted that a lot in the lead up to this season, and that the need for that unit to be more consistent, to play at a higher level. And I think that's going to be important, especially with the question marks around quarterback and the passing game right now. But if the offensive line is able to impose its will in this game, control the line of scrimmage, get holes for Caleb and LaShawn, that's going to go a long way towards giving Iowa a much improved opportunity to win the game. So, yeah, though definitely a winnable game, but definitely also one with some real question marks. This is of the early games, the one for Iowa that gives me the most pause by far.
The other thing I wanted to note from 2 years ago, that game that Iowa State came into Kinnick Stadium and won, man, Iowa had so many opportunities to win that game. So many opportunities. That's the reason I go back to Iowa winning this one, is because they essentially gave that one up, handed it to Iowa State on a silver platter.
Yeah, that was an ugly game. And about half my family is Iowa State grads or super fans, and they will taunt, brag, gloat about anything. Again, it's a rivalry. That's the way it should be. After that game, crickets. It was so ugly that they didn't even want to gloat about it. But it was basically two teams, seeing who could lose the game more, and it turned out to be Iowa, missing that kick at the very end. But I don't think the level of execution is going to be that bad for either team this time around. So I think it's going to be a pretty competitive game. I think, again, Iowa should be favored. I think Iowa should win that game, but should doesn't have a whole lot of place in the Cy-Hawk rivalry. So I would just say buckle up and and hope things don't lurch too badly to the Cardinal and Gold.
Week 3 is Troy, which is going to be a very different looking team than they were last year. Coming back, they are 11-3, but they've got a new head coach in Gerard Parker, who's the offensive coordinator and tight ends coach at Notre Dame. And fun fact, this is where Tim Lester was set to be OC before he took over as Iowa's offensive coordinator. And again, I mean, I don't know how much we can even really look into this team, given the fact that it is quite a bit of turnover compared to last season. They are a group of 5 team, and Iowa should maybe not run away with this one, but they should win it. I don't know if you guys have anything to add there.
Yeah,
go ahead,
Russ.
No, go ahead.
Troy is replacing a lot of guys. The quarterback situation, their presumed starter is a guy who has a name that could also like double as a crime and or a social problem. Goose Crowder. You shouldn't be crowding geese, as far as I'm concerned. He's going to step into a situation where Troy likes to, or at the very least, Troy used to like to, sling the ball around a little bit. They do have some real talent to replace on the offensive line, which you look at Iowa's defensive line, and it looks like this unit from the Trojans is not going to be the type that really forces a lot out of that Iowa defensive front. So they can rotate a little bit more liberally without any fear of any sort of mismatches or downgrade in terms of the matchups. So I do think that we're going to see a pretty effective day for Iowa's defensive line. And when Iowa can start to do what it wants on defense and really control the tempo, the pace, keep Troy from doing the things that they want to do the best. And Phil Parker knows what those are already, I guarantee you guys. I think this is going to be a pretty easy test for Iowa, just because I don't think they're going to need to score more than 10, 12, 13, 14 points for the win. And, at this point, they'll have had their tune-up against Illinois State. They will have played a tougher Iowa State defense than what Troy's going to put on the field. So it'll be a little bit of a relief there, too. So, yeah, I think this is a favorable matchup for Iowa, and honestly, a pretty good one for a week 3 before you head into that Big Ten. It really gives you an opportunity to get a few of the things right that, assuming that they're going to see more than a few mistakes in that Iowa State game, just based on what we saw this past Saturday. This is your time to implement those changes, do some really, really valuable film work and bring that level of play up against a lower level competitor. Now, that being said, like you said before, Troy is not Illinois State. Troy is not D3. This is a team with a lot of guys that still know what winning football is like. So Iowa better strap their pads on tight for this, just like any other. That's not just coach speak. That's not just avoid the bulletin board material that coaches are normally going to say. I guarantee you, Kirk Ferentz at his press conference the Tuesday prior to this game is going to sound like the Trojans are capable of winning this one by 30. A lot of coaches act like that, but yeah, I don't think it's a sure thing, especially if some of that turbulence in the offensive execution hasn't really started to fix itself. But by and large, I think this is another real substantial advantage for Iowa in the matchup. Ross, do you agree there?
Absolutely, I do. Yep, I think there are a lot of advantages for Iowa and from a personnel standpoint in this game, which should come into play. Fun-ish fact about Parker, he does have some experience in the Big Ten. He replaced Daryl Hazel at Purdue in
Ooh.
2016 as an interim head coach there and proceeded to go 0-6 in the Boilermakers' remaining 6 games. Just a
Is
lot
that
of turn.
good?
What's that?
Is that good? 0-6? Is that what you want?
Not ideal, I think. Um, Parker and Troy, just a lot of turnover on this team, a lot of new faces, especially on defense. This feels like a game. I think for Iowa's offense, this may be a good opportunity for them to maybe get a few things right heading into the Big Ten season, work on a few things. And yeah, this does feel like a game where the defense can, have a lot of success against Troy. Although the offensive line is one of the strengths of the Trojan team. So, it could be a nice opportunity for the D line to get some work in and see what they can do. But overall, it does feel like the Trojans are pretty overmatched here, and there should be a chance for Iowa to get a win before the Big Ten season starts in full.
All righty. So 3-0 is what we're taking into conference play. Yay or nay?
Presumably. Yeah, I'd put them at about 2.5, 2.6 wins at this point.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll go
Yeah.
yay as well with trepidation about the Iowa State game, but I'm still a yay overall.
Okay. Now we head on to Minnesota. This one will be in Minneapolis. Of course, the Gophers stole one in Iowa City last year, which is, I put in parentheses, still bullshit. The Gophers went 6-7 last season. They are picked to finish 12th in the Big Ten. That's according to the Cleveland.com poll. The Gophers have a new quarterback after Ethan Kaliakmanis is transferred to Rutgers and beaten Gavin Wimsatt out for the starting position for the Scarlet Knights. Not something that I predicted going into the season. But the Gophers are going to be a bit of a new look team as well. I believe I saw Darius Taylor went down with a bit of an injury today. Nothing major. And then Daniel Jackson, who led them in receiving last year, same thing. Again, they should be back from what I've been able to tell. So this is a team that I think Iowa is really fiending for some redemption. It would not surprise me in the slightest if Kirk went into Minneapolis and Iowa beat the shit out of them. To put it plainly, I don't see a scenario where, well, you can obviously see a scenario with what happened last year, but Hawkeyes, I really do think they enter this game with a vengeance and handle the Gophers in Minneapolis.
Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, the quarterback drama that was going on there is a little bit spicy, and it's a little bit interesting that Fleck has by and large been able to skate above it, because Kaliakmanis apparently after the season, Fleck met with his QB room, said, by the way, I'm not committing to any of you to start, and I'm going to go get a QB in the portal. And they got this kid from New Hampshire, who apparently, what did he do? Lead FCS in passing yards last year. So that being said, there's a little bit of a difference between playing football in New England and playing it in the Big Ten, and playing it against the Phil Parker defense too. So, they've got a lot of turnover, or excuse me, they've got a lot of ground to make up at QB. I know their wide receiver situation is a pretty green as well, kind of like the Hawkeyes. So it's going to be tough for the Gophers to throw the ball on Iowa. And if they're not able to run the ball as well, I think Phil Parker should certainly expect a heavy dose of the run game in this one. So that's really going to be the key matchup to me, is whether or not Iowa can keep the Gophers from getting those 3 yards, 4 yards, 5 yards per carry. Because when Iowa doesn't do that, There was a game at Kinnick not too long ago. I can't remember if it was 2 or 3 years ago, where basically Jack Campbell had to win that game for Iowa because is it pronounced Ibrahim? It's pronounced weird, but
I think it's Ibrahim.
Ibrahim, yeah. Either way, like he was 240, 250 yards in that game. And it's a little unusual to see Iowa struggle like that, keeping a run game down. So we know that Fleck knows a few things about moving the ball on the Hawkeyes. We also know that Kirk Ferentz has very little, a regard for PJ Fleck, does not really try to, keep things close with him, does not have any, barrier against rubbing his nose in it a little bit. Kirk plays favorites a few times with his conference rivals. And, how many years ago it was that he even burned all his timeouts at the end of the game, just to send a message. I think Kirk absolutely loves the rivalry aspect of Iowa, Minnesota. They love the pig. And yeah, absolutely. They're burning up about how that last game ended. And I mean, really, just to take such an incredible touchdown off the board. Some sour tastes in not only the Hawkeyes' mouths, but the Hawk fans' mouths. I think this is going to be the chippiest game of the season that Iowa plays. Might not even be close. For that reason, I think it's going to be one of the most entertaining games too. But I'm very, very curious to see how Minnesota essentially revamps this lineup with a brand new QB, with a all right, are we doing this? And are we going to be a run first team? Do we think that we've got the personnel to be a pass first team? That's going to be fascinating to see. We'll at the very least have 3 weeks of, games from the Gophers to see what their identity is morphing into. But yeah, I think everybody in both locker rooms has this one circled on their calendars. Ross, do you agree?
100%. It's like a pivot point of the season game, I think, for both programs to an extent. If this is a game that if they win, especially for Iowa, it can, help them towards a much better season. If they lose, those playoff aspirations out the window, and you're looking at another 8-4-ish season, potentially, maybe a lot of, questions there. I think for Minnesota, they've got some tough games coming after this one. They got Michigan and USC, I believe. So they need a win here to kind of, head into those games with a spring in their step. And it's for the pig. Minnesota wants to keep Floyd. Iowa wants Floyd back. Last year's game, very contentious. I think you're right, Adam, in terms of the chippiness factor. This is going to be way up there. Maybe only the Nebraska game, off the top of my head, could enter those sweepstakes, and Iowa State, of course. You're going to add something there, Adam?
Well, one other thing that I'm just going to point out about Max Brosmer, the New Hampshire QB that they brought in, he's a little bit mistake prone. And that is enough to get Phil Parker salivating. I'm just going to read off what PFF has for his weaknesses. In 2023, Brosmer recorded 9 turnover-worthy plays in the 10 to 19-yard range, third most in the FCS. He also tends to make mistakes when forced to throw off platform. His accuracy declines when his feet are not set in the pocket. He was also a below-average rushing threat at the FCS level, so he's unlikely to improve in that when competing in the Big Ten. Guys, what that tells me is pin your ears back and drop this guy, right? That's blood in the water. That's chum for a defense like Iowa, a defensive coordinator like Phil Parker. I think they are really, really going to get after that offensive backfield in a way that we don't normally see them, or with a frequency that we don't normally see from the Hawkeyes. I might be wrong. This might be some galaxy brain, or there might be some galaxy brain play by Parker to not blitz at all and really, mess up what Minnesota's expecting. But by and large, when you've got a guy like this, that whole scouting report sounds a whole lot like Iowa's QBs from the last 15 years, CJ Beathard accepted. And we know what gets Iowa's QBs, historically off off program. And this, Iowa's defense, Iowa's front seven in particular, Sebastian Castro, I think he's going to live in the backfield or behind the line of scrimmage in this game. Yeah, there's a ton of opportunity unless Brosmer takes some gigantic leap under Fleck. And I don't think Fleck is much of a QB whisperer. Unless he takes a real leap in terms of his composure, I think he's going to have a really, really tough time. And Iowa's going to focus hard on disrupting what they're trying to do.
I hope Castro doesn't live in the backfield, Adam, because he's going to get a lot of offsides penalties if he tries to do that. So that'd be a bad idea. I think the D-line pressure is a big key in this game. You mentioned the running game. There's no Mo Ibrahim there anymore. I don't think they've got some talented running backs, but I don't think the running game is as scary without Mo there leading it. So I do think Iowa's going to have some more success bottling them up. So then it's a question of, getting pressure on that quarterback and, forcing some mistakes. And that is something Phil Parker has 25 years of experience now doing on a consistent basis at Iowa. So,
well, Ross, talking about the running back group, Darius Taylor, he only played in 6 games last year, but he took 138 carries for 799 yards and 5 touchdowns. So other than probably Quinshawn Junkins, Travion Henderson at Ohio State, he might be in the running for being the best running back in the Big Ten. So, and then Daniel Jackson, I mean, other than him, I don't know what the rest of the Minnesota receiving group looks like. He led the team in receptions with 59, which sounds like a completely freaking foreign concept to us, right? With 831 receiving yards and 8 touchdowns. So Minnesota's not lacking weapons, guys. I mean, I'm not bullish on this quarterback from New Hampshire by any means. That might be their weak link, but they're not lacking weapons.
But their problem is they really don't have a whole lot behind Jackson at receiver. Only 3 receivers had even 100 receiving yards last year, which again sounds a lot like Iowa, and Jackson's the only one back. So, they've got warm bodies. They've got opportunities for guys to step up and, make some plays. And maybe we see somebody really, emerge out of the woodwork there. But by and large, in terms of experience, especially against Big Ten competition, I think that passing game has to grow up real quick for the Gophers, or it's going to be a long day.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, I think the potential is there for this to be a similar game to the Iowa-Minnesota game last year in terms of a very defensive slugfest, unless the Iowa passing game has really made some strides by that point in the season. And, if Cade or Brendan, whoever's starting at that point, if they're able to show a lot more accuracy in the passing department, then I think there could be some opportunities for Iowa to make some things happen and through the air and open things up a bit. But if the passing game is still, struggling, this could just be a lot of just 2 Rams butting into each other, for 60 minutes basically, and coming down to a defensive or special teams play. And we'll see if the officials decide to let it stand this year if it comes down to that. Hopefully not. That it doesn't come down to that is.
With all of those things in mind, given what happened last year, given the history of Kirk really not being a fan of PJ, I'm picking the Gophers here. It might be a slugfest, but I think the Hawkeyes pull it out.
You said
I do too.
You're picking the Gophers or the Hawkeyes there?
The Hawkeyes.
Okay, I think you said Gophers first, but all right.
Yeah, you did. I was like,
Yeah.
whoa.
Oh, sorry, guys. Picking the Hawkeyes.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, I'd say Iowa probably low teens, maybe 10, 12, 14 points thereabout. But I think Iowa does match up pretty well in this game.
Yeah, I'm 70-30 for Iowa with this one. Maybe like a 16-13 kind of finish, 16-10, something like that. It'll probably be close one way or another.
It wouldn't surprise me if they cracked 20 points. Crazy. I know.
I'm going to need to see a little bit of something before that. Before I'm gonna go out on a limb like that. But okay, we're all seeing the Hawkeyes 4-0 heading into Columbus and preseason number 2 Ohio State, who went 11-2 last year. have been called the most talented Ohio State team that Urban Meyer has seen. Picked first in the Big Ten Cleveland.com poll. Oh gosh, you guys. In looking at this, like they're loaded, right? They don't have Marvin Harrison, but they've got Emeka Egbuka. They don't have CJ Stroud. It's Will Howard, and some stuff that I've heard throughout the media, nothing like behind the scenes or anything, is that Will Howard hasn't exactly locked down the starting job there. It sounds like it's actually a competition. I mean, I didn't watch a ton of Howard at Kansas State, but he's not this big not super athlete, but great athlete and potential NFL first round draft pick like a CJ Stroud was. He's not CJ Stroud. I mean, Ohio State went into the portal and got rid of McCord because they thought they could do better, and then they bring in Will Howard, and I think they were really hoping for Cam Ward out of the portal, and they didn't get Cam Ward. Cam Ward went to Miami, and now he's a Heisman hopeful and coming all the way up from FCS. Oh gosh, Incarnate Word before he was at Washington State, and now with the Canes. Obviously, not exactly pertinent to Ohio State here, but they don't have that CJ Stroud-esque quarterback that can potentially pick apart Iowa's defense, and that might be the only glimmer of hope that I think the Hawkeyes have in this one, because I just really going into the shoe and upsetting the Buckeyes. This is the one that I think everybody is counting as a loss right off the bat at the beginning of the season, and I'd be hard pressed to find a way where Iowa heads to Ohio State and beats what's probably going to be the number 1, 2, or 3 team in the country at that point in time.
Yeah, this would
typically.
be one of the most shocking, I think, upset wins of the Kirk Ferentz era. Even though, like, Iowa's, if they're 4-0, they're going to go into this game ranked maybe in that 15-ish range for this game. But like you said, Eliot, this is a very loaded Ohio State team. There were a lot of surprises, I think, from people around the Big Ten and maybe even Ohio State fans about how many of those guys opted to return this year instead of entering the NFL draft. And, how much of that was unfinished business, how much of that was NIL, how much of that was, a lot of factors. The end result is this is a stacked roster with the, exception of quarterback that does not look stacked. They're going from CJ Stroud to somebody else, probably Will Howard, but we'll see if he's the man at quarterback by the time Iowa visits in early October. But there's just so much talent at every other position, I think, that it's going to be, you're hard pressed, like you said, to find a way for Iowa to win this game. It requires a heroic effort from the defense, a lot of turnovers, I think, from the Ohio State offense, and the Iowa offense to show something it has not shown in the last couple seasons, which is the ability to, number one, move the ball, don't 3 and out and punt or turn the ball over against an elite defense. We have not seen that from them for quite a while at this point. So they need to, hold on to the ball, move the ball, and score points. You're not going to beat. I don't think you're not going to beat Ohio State in a 12-10 slobber knocker. Like, that would be the preferred way for Iowa to win this game. I don't know how that happens, short of some apocalyptic weather that makes it impossible to score points or something. So, yeah, there are a lot of factors that have to go Iowa's way. I don't see it, but you guys chime in here.
Before you share here, Adam, I will say I would be surprised if it's not Will Howard. There is some chatter. I think Aaron Noland is the one who transferred in from Alabama, the freshman. But I would be pretty surprised if it's not Will Howard. And like I mentioned, Emeka Egbuka, Jeremiah Smith is supposed to be this unreal recruit to a 5-star receiver that is probably next up behind Egbuka. So they lost Marvin Harrison Jr., who was like an all-time type of prospect, but then they just reload because they're Ohio State. So it's not like it's not like they're going to be lacking in really any department. And I mean, like, if Iowa somehow got Will Howard out of the transfer portal this year, we would be talking about him as being the potential savior. So let's keep that in context.
Yeah, and you can also throw Devin Brown in the mix. He had sort of been the backup plan for McCord last year, and I know that they're still pretty high on him, and they're happy that he came back this year. So, they have depth in that QB room. They just sort of have to figure out who their best option is. But really, in terms of the threats that Iowa's facing in this, for me, I think it starts with Ohio State's defensive line. JT Tui Moloau and Jack Sawyer in particular. I mean, those guys are absolute beasts. And, if this is really a step up year for the likes of Mason Richmond, Jennings Dunker, Connor, really the entire front five, this is going to be where they have to show it. And Tim Lester in particular, I think we're going to see him try to get the ball out of either Cade or Sullivan's hands as quickly as possible. So, probably more RPO stuff, probably more quick hits or, outside zone speed, stretch type runs too, maybe some jet sweeps too. But ultimately what you're trying to do is slow that defense down because they are so fast and violent. And so, does Iowa win a 12-10 slobber knocker? Probably not. Is that probably their only chance though? I would say so. So I think they have a very, very tough matchup here, not only for the sheer talent level that Ohio State has that everybody knows about and that you guys have talked about, but Ohio State's strengths in particular and Iowa's weaknesses in particular, at least the ones that we know about at this point here in mid-August, that makes it even tougher for the Hawkeyes. So, yeah, this is going to be an extraordinary challenge, especially if Ohio State has figured out which guy in their QB room is the guy.
The other thing, I'm looking at Ohio State's schedule here. Week 1, Akron. Week 2, Western Michigan. Week 3, Marshall. Week 4, Michigan State. They're probably going to be favored by 30-plus points in all of those games. So they've got a cakewalk up to Iowa. But in week 6, I think it's week 6. Yeah. They're at Oregon. So trap game?
Perhaps.
We will start a dialogue here on HawkCast.
Well, they at the very least, they don't have that lingering bitterness from 55-24 because they got it back from the Hawkeyes on the last trip to the shoe. So at the very least, there's not going to be that extra like oomph for revenge. So yeah, trap game confirmed. You got it.
So I take it we're all seeing the Hawkeyes taking their first loss of the season to the Bucks in Columbus.
Yes. I would say there's about a 5% chance Iowa wins this game.
On the bright side, I will be heading out to Columbus for this game, and I'll get to see Jimmy Sullivan play in person for the first time. Iowa's 2025 QB commit. I'm very excited for that. That's the plan. Come October 5th, I think it was. Yes, October 5th. So the 4th is when I'll see Jimmy play there in Indiana, and I'm really excited about that. That'll be my first time watching him play, like I said. So never got to watch James Rezar play because he was all the way down in Florida. So the first time I saw him throw was this last week. So anyway, that's beside the point. Recruiting analysts getting all giddy over here. Sorry. On to week 6, Iowa plays the first time they're playing a former Pac-12 team in the Big Ten. Washington travels to Kinnick. They're coming off a 13-1 year last season where they went to the national championship with Michael Penix, who I'm sure is happy to not be returning to Kinnick Stadium and instead being in Atlanta after what happened a few years ago with Indiana. But Washington, they've got an essentially entire new team under Jed Fish, who I believe is a good coach, and somehow they're picked to finish 10th in the Big Ten in this Cleveland.com poll with a whole new roster, a whole new staff. I don't know how the hell they make that happen. But is Will Rogers their quarterback, the transfer from Mississippi State? Is that who it is?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he's a pretty solid quarterback. He's not a guy that's going to go to the NFL, right? He's not going to be a first round. Well, he might go, but he's not going to be a first round pick, right? good college quarterback who's going to be remembered at both Mississippi State and Washington for what he did, what he was able to accomplish. But when you're starting a program essentially from scratch, you're trying to meld things together. You're trying to coalesce this team and make something like some sort of consistent product. To go into Kinnick Stadium and do that against the Hawkeyes, who are going to have an elite defense once again in 2024. Will Rogers might be a good quarterback. We've seen good quarterbacks come into Kinnick Stadium and suddenly not be good quarterbacks, right? I just don't see a scenario where this team, who is completely put together from scratch and traveling all the way to a different time zone, middle America, one of these flyover states they probably refer to it as, coming from Seattle, and putting together a winning football game. And again, in their first year in the conference, I really think Iowa's going to try to smash mouth football them to death in this one and show them what Big Ten football is.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, this is, Iowa's first game against one of those former Pac-12 teams in Kinnick. Likely, we mentioned, the Ohio State game probably coming off a loss in that one. So, licking some wounds from that one, trying to regroup and rebound from that. And, it is very difficult to know what to expect from Washington this year, because it is a very different team than the one that, to correct my note that Eliot mentioned, that they were 13-1. They actually went 14-1 last year, lost to Michigan in the national championship game. So won a lot of games, had a great season. All the dudes that did that are gone. They're either in the NFL now or they transferred to other programs. Obviously, Washington was very active in the transfer portal themselves and brought in a lot of guys. You highlighted Rogers at quarterback. They've, backfilled at a lot of other positions too. So, I think the talent level is going to be higher than, a team that had that much, guys leave would be in the past. But, the question of how well they gel, how well that talent adapts to playing Big Ten opponents, etc. Those are all very open questions for me. And yeah, I see Iowa, like Eliot said, really trying to make this a very physical game, really try to beat them up on the line of scrimmage, establish a running game, and try and punish the Huskies that way. Adam, how do you see this one going?
Well, I'm especially interested in how they mesh a QB like Will Rogers, who is not a defense stretcher by any means, but he's very effective throwing in that, intermediate to short range, 20 yards and in. So Iowa's defensive secondary, the linebackers, they are going to have some work to do because Rogers can complete passes pretty well. I think he was at like 70% at Mississippi State. He's got some mobility a little bit too. But I think the Washington offensive line in particular will have had to do some growing up, or they're going to be in a little bit of trouble. They brought in a kid from San Diego State, Drew Azzopardi, who is a legit NFL prospect. But by and large, that was another area where they got hit pretty hard by departures after last season's sort of miracle run. So in terms of what we saw on the field from the Huskies last year, that's not going to resemble what is on the field against the Hawkeyes. But, we know that Jed Fish knows how to coach an offense really well. And then the key really is going to be how well does Iowa sustain drives? Because that Washington defense, especially with what they're bringing back, last year they weren't that great at getting opposing offenses off the field. It just didn't matter because, Penix would just show up and, toss 30-yard darts to Odunze all day. So, we will see if, once Washington's back, into the range of the mortals on offense, if they're able to get key stops and, if Iowa and that offensive situation, which I think by the middle of the year, we'll have a pretty good idea in terms of, how well has this offense gelled, because the, whatever the opposite of a honeymoon period is, that's pretty much over by the middle of the season. So it's really proving time at that point for the Hawkeyes. And this is another situation where, the Washington talent level on defense is not game breaking. It's not a, clean up their own mistakes type of thing. So Iowa does have an opportunity here. Is the offense good enough to turn that into points and keep this one, really keep ahead of the Huskies? And of course, as always, are they turning these guys over? Rodgers is accurate enough and smart enough and experienced enough that you're probably not going to see a bunch of dumb mistakes. You're probably not going to see a 4 interception game out of the Ball Hawks. Phil Parker would like that. Everybody would like that. I don't think that's the formula for winning this game. I think it's going to come down to sustaining drives on offense, making sure that when Washington does move the ball, it's for 3 points and not 7. And then again, special teams. Grady Gross, the kicker for the Huskies, he's got a little bit of talent, and that is going to cause some, or at the very least, it's not the sort of weak point. So can you keep the Huskies out of field goal range? Can you keep them punting? That's really going to be the key. And I think this, again, and we're not trying to be a broken record here, but I think this is going to be one of the lower scoring games of the season. And if Iowa gets it to 20, that might be enough.
Rodgers, by these stats, looks like he was part of essentially, if not exactly, an air raid offense there at Mississippi State. Completed 1,301 passes over 4 years, but also those 4 years with are they the Bulldogs? Is that Mississippi State's mascot?
Yep.
The Bulldogs threw 28 interceptions, so 7 interceptions a year. Maybe not 4 picks in a game, but wouldn't shock me if he threw 1 or 2 against these Hawkeyes. Probably with the ability to pass the ball and complete 70% of his passes over his career, probably going to be one of these games where they're able to move the ball between the 20s, but then, not a whole lot after that. So Iowa's defense probably it would not surprise me based on what you said about the offensive line paired with all of these things of them gelling that Iowa just kind of beats the hell out of them through this game. So that's what I'd say. I think they move to 5-1 after this one.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the reasonable expectation at this point of the season is 5-1, 4-2 at worst.
Agreed.
The other thing I forgot to mention in looking at the actual schedule on Iowa's website is that the game before Ohio State, they don't have one. It's a bye week, and we know how Kirk tends to struggle off bye weeks. So not just things aren't really adding up for that one. Now on to
if I'll just inject one thing here. I think the bye week is going to help Iowa just because this is year 1 of the Tim Lester era.
That's true.
So yeah, I think they'll be able to work, improve, instruct, whereas in years past, I don't really think they had that capability. I think bye weeks were more helpful for rest, and that's just about it. So it'll be interesting to see if that bye week struggle continues with a more proactive offensive vision. So that's all.
You heard it here first, folks. Adam says that Tim Lester is going to install an Ohio State beating game plan during the bye week.
That is verbatim exactly what I said. Exactly.
On to Michigan State here, who went 4-8 last season. Of course, gave the Hawkeyes some troubles last year. That was the one where Cade McNamara went down. Was that in the first quarter or the second quarter? I think it was the first quarter. Yeah,
first or early in the second. He didn't play many snaps. I know that.
Right. Okay. Now they're taking over with a new head coach from Oregon State, Jonathan Smith, moving over, who I think is a good coach, but taking over a program that lost a ton of talent. I think they had something crazy number of players enter the portal, like 40 or 50, something insane. I think it led FBS. Well, if it led FBS, probably the country. Of course, again, they went 4-8 last season. Iowa beat them thanks to Cooper DeJean late touchdown return in the punt game, 26-16. They are picked to finish 16th in the 18-team Big Ten this season. The only thing that I will say concerns me about this, because a lot of that, what I just said about Washington, translates to the Spartans. Whole new team, lots of new pieces. But they've got a new quarterback too from Oregon State, who I believe was a 4-star for us in Aiden Childs, who is a classic dual threat quarterback. I mean, you look at he hasn't competed yet. He didn't play for Oregon State last year because of DJU. But looking at what he was able to do at the high school level, this is a legit dual threat quarterback that could give problems to a program like Iowa, more so down the road than I think in this first year as Michigan State's starting quarterback. But again, we are a few weeks into the season here, so he may have started to settle in, so to speak, depending on how good Michigan State's weapons are, one, but two, how good the offensive line is in as well.
Yeah, and especially if you just look back at the Citrus Bowl last year, Nico Iamaleava, that is basically the blueprint for how a dual threat QB can attack this Iowa defense. So we know that at the very least, Smith is going to have an idea of how to use Childs, but this is a guy who is going to have basically a half season as a starter, assuming that he wins that job, and I think that he will. Smart, accurate passer, he can move. We've seen that type of quarterback give Iowa difficulty. That being said, I don't trust the skill position players for the Spartans just yet. They did get a couple guys in the transfer portal on the offensive line. If they're able to gel, and again, we're talking about what is this, the 7th game of the season, they will have had that opportunity to really start to gel as a front five. So it doesn't look like a just pin your ears back and obliterate these guys. They think they're smart enough to know how to get Iowa's defense maybe not back on its heels, but to get them looking before moving. Right. Like reacting instead of acting. And that is going to cause some problems for the Phil Parker defense, just because, we've seen what happens when somebody can move and can also pass, and when the scheme really tailors itself to them. And the fact that Childs came with Smith from Oregon State tells me that there is that standing rapport with them. So that matchup is kind of what gives me a little bit of pause here, even though, you look at Michigan State across the board and, talent wise, they're not a top of the big, or even a top half of the Big Ten team. The one thing that I will mention, though, that Michigan State defense got wrecked last year, often, not against Iowa, but but against a lot of good offenses. If you're able to move the ball with any regularity, which Iowa wasn't, but the offenses that did moved it like early and often against Sparty. So that is going to be an early work in progress, and Iowa really needs to look at this as an opportunity to get some touchdowns on the board, to really get these guys understanding what the offense is supposed to be, really get that execution and that timing up to where, a Tim Lester offense in particular needs to be successful. So I think this is going to be one of the higher scoring games on the schedule this year, just because I think both teams are going to be capable of scoring on each other. I do think by and large, though, Iowa has advantages in the right places, and I'm more optimistic for Iowa to win this game than not. You guys agree?
I do. Yeah, I feel like overall this is a pretty good time for Iowa to be playing Smith and Childs at Michigan State and their, progression. Like in a year, 2 years, they could have something pretty good going on there in East Lansing. I think Smith's a good coach. Childs is a very, very talented quarterback prospect. If that manifests as a good quarterback, period, then they'll be in pretty good shape, depending on the schedule and everything. But, for them to make some noise, but I don't quite think they'll be there this year, especially halfway through the season. I think there's going to be growing pains. I think that Iowa defense is going to have some opportunities to make things very challenging for them. Adam wanted to add something there.
Yeah, all I'll add is Sparty's got a bye week going into this game. So, if you put any stock into that, that especially for a first year head coach like Jonathan Smith, use your words, Adam, that might be something that helps them, get their plan right, identify some weaknesses, some strengths, gets them closer to that rebuilding process. But, by and large, again, I think Iowa's got the advantages where they need them to win this game, but it will be, I would say, probably one of the top 3 highest scoring games of the season. You heard it here, folks. Heard it here first, folks. Really going out on a limb.
Yeah, I mean, the bye week is a good point. This is also in a very difficult stretch of games.
I was just going to say
for Michigan State. Like they've got Ohio State and Oregon at Oregon prior to Iowa, and they're at Michigan after Iowa. So very, Iowa's the middle of that sandwich. We'll see how they're feeling after those, Ohio State and Oregon games. They might need a bye week just to recover from those.
That's one of those that you look back and say, I want to know what the total score is between these 4 games for Michigan State, because it's not going to be pretty.
Yeah, there goes the point differential, like those columns. They're like, ooh.
Right. So Hawkeyes are, let's see here, for 6-1 at this point for us. Yes, yay, nay.
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty good about that.
All right, 6-1. And now things get a little more interesting, taking on Northwestern. This one is at home after the Hawkeyes played the Wildcats in Wrigley last year. And of course, that one was ugly as hell. 10-7, Hawkeyes win. Northwestern picked 14th in the Big Ten in that Cleveland.com preseason poll, and they finished the season 8-5 last year. Of course, Iowa took Brendan Sullivan and Jacob Gill from the Wildcats via the transfer portal this year. Neither of them really expected to contribute if they stuck in Chicago, or Evanston rather, this year had they stayed, but probably going to be contributors one way or another this season unless we see an astronomical improvement by Cade in these next few weeks. But that is it's here and there, speaking of both of them. But this is an interesting one with David Braun being back for his second year with the Wildcats, because year one, I remember going on this preview podcast last year and saying they might not win a game. I said, hammer the under, and what did they do? They must have listened and used it as big board material, because they were not bad last year. They weren't good enough to beat Iowa, but they were not bad. And they go and win 8 games. Now, what I would say about Northwestern going into this season is, what do you do? What did you mention? The opposite of a honeymoon phase? I kind of have a feeling that might be what we see with the Wildcats this year. First year with David Braun, he's doing everything. It's kind of like a panic where you do everything at your highest level because you're just so he was thrown into a position, right? So I have to do everything right. We do the best of our abilities, and now he's entering year 2. Maybe he relaxes a little bit. Maybe the team, that sense of urgency isn't quite there as it was in year 1. And maybe they see that second year setback. But then again, Northwestern kind of seems to be this team that finds a way to beat Iowa when they're having pretty good seasons. So I would imagine this is another, 17-14, 14-11, some weird freaking score like that, because that's what Iowa does. But some crazy thing like that, unless maybe Brendan Sullivan is the full-time starter and he says, okay, and then they rip them apart. It's one of these 55-4 games that rarely gets posted. But Yeah, I mean, I could see it going either way. I'm really intrigued by Northwestern going into this season.
It felt to me like a lot of things broke Northwestern's way during the season last year. Like you look at some of the stats from last year and they make you go, Like they had more yards of offense in 2022 when they went 1-11 than in 2023 when they won a lot more games. They went 7-5, I believe, during the regular season. So, it just says that the offense was, Iowa fans know what this is like. The offense does just enough in, things break your way, and it works. And then the turnovers too was another factor that was very beneficial for them. They lost one fumble last year. I am going to go out on a limb, and a very strong limb, and say that's not going to happen again this year. They will lose more than one fumble. They threw only 8 interceptions all year. I mean, that isn't as variable as fumble recovery, but still pretty low. So, they did not turn the ball over last year, which is a credit to them, but it's hard to do that 2 years in a row, I think. So I am thinking there's going to be some regression there from the Wildcats. And yeah, like you mentioned, Eliot, in terms of that, the anti-honeymoon period, as it were, like a lot of things went right for Braun and Northwestern last year. And I do think he is a good coach based on what he showed last year, but I think there's going to be a lot of adversity to deal with this year, and going to be more difficult for them. In terms of what that means for this game, the Iowa Northwestern game, man, I agree with you again, where, who knows with this game, because we've seen, good Iowa Northwestern teams. We've seen bad ones play, good and bad. And the end result is never exactly what you expect, I think, from the teams coming into the game. Like it can be very strange often. So I'm definitely leaning an Iowa win, especially since it's in Kinnick. But there's always a 10 to 15 at least % chance of some Northwestern devil magic hitting, and you don't want to be on the wrong end of that. Adam, how concerned are you about Northwestern devil magic in this game?
You know as well as I do that I am perennial concerned with Northwestern devil magic because it's real and it has cost Iowa several games over the last 20 years in particular. And, what really stands out to me is that Northwestern has got to figure out what its offensive line situation is, because it was an even bigger mess going into this season than it was last year. And again, you look at Iowa, you look at what the front seven, you look at Sebastian Castro, like Iowa knows how to disrupt and really make life difficult for bad offensive lines. And when that's the case, it means life is difficult for the quarterback. In Northwestern, they got Mike Wright from, I almost said Michigan State, Mississippi State, another Bulldog, another from the cowbell fields of Starkville. But this is still another like rebuilding year for that offense. They still need to figure out what it is they're doing, and especially with more turnover on the offensive line, it does not look like the track record doesn't indicate how they're going to be successful moving the ball, scoring touchdowns. They're probably going to be depending on Iowa mistakes, which is a crucial part of the Northwestern devil magic over the years. So I think if Iowa plays a discipline game here, they have, again, the advantages in the right places, especially on defense, to keep some distance between themselves and the Wildcats. But if this game stays close, anything can happen. And we've seen Northwestern turn that anything into improbable wins, especially in Kinnick, over and over again. So I think really what the Wildcats are going to try to do is get away with an illegal hands to the face, maybe injure a quarterback in the end zone, score a touchdown that way, and never look back. Shout out to Ricky Stanzi. But yeah, I think Iowa should win, but just like the Iowa State series, should has very little bearing in Iowa Northwestern over the years.
The good news is this year there will not be, we think, a sinkhole that cannot be filled during the game.
The other thing,
Love your Wrigley.
the other thing I'll say, Mike Wright, this is the third school of his college football career. He started at Vanderbilt. He was a 4-star quarterback for us and went to Vanderbilt for some reason. Academics must be important when you go to Vanderbilt and then, well, maybe not at Mississippi State, but and then at Northwestern. But I wouldn't say he's had a stellar college football career by any means. And I don't know that he played against, well, being at Vanderbilt, he'd probably played against some solid defenses and Mississippi State for that matter, but probably nothing like Iowa.
All I'm going to say is let's not cast aspersions against Mississippi State, which is widely regarded as the Harvard of Northeast Mississippi. Everybody thinks that.
So Iowa, anyway, so Iowa wins this one. Are we? I mean, is this one with the Wildcats steal? How are we feeling, guys?
No, I do feel pretty good about Iowa in this game. You know, I have lingering concern because of the Northwestern of it all, but from a matchup standpoint, it does feel just a lot of things that cut in Iowa's favor. So I am a pretty strong Iowa W here.
Yeah, I think Iowa again matches up well in the right spot. So I think Iowa is more likely than not to win this game. But also I'll just point out that we're talking about 8 games in, and there's been a lot of the like Iowa slightly favored sort of situations. So like if you guys have ever seen the Ken Pom thing, like we're really stacking like 70% win percentage, 70, 65, 60, 70. And so I think Iowa's going to be favored in a ton of these games, especially like basically I think they'll be favored in pretty much every game except Ohio State at this point, certainly. But does that translate into 7-1, or is it, or does it start to slide into like, well, they lose one of them? So I would wager at this point that their record is closer to 6-2 than 7-1, but I also don't think that this is the second loss. It just doesn't look like Northwestern knows what it wants to do on offense and then can do it better than what Iowa's defense can stop them from doing. So, yeah, I think this is a win. But again, we're getting into the point where like it's like saying, yeah, I think I won't roll a 1 on this die, and then we're more than 6 rolls into it. Like something might have happened at this point.
I mean, this is the Minnesota game, right? Last year, and like for this specific reason, obviously it was crazy. Like the outcome, how it happened was weird, but that's the Minnesota game where Iowa was favored more often than not. They win that game and then they find a way to lose it. Like it's just one of those weird ones. And Northwestern, and I mean maybe Minnesota again, it could be one of those, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of with Adam where like my game by game prediction probably has it at 7-1, but I feel a little bit like 6-2 might be more likely. But if I'm picking those 2 losses, obviously one is Ohio State. The second loss, I would feel I'm more, I don't know if confidence the right word, but thinking it's more likely to come from like Iowa State or Minnesota, or maybe Washington or Michigan State if things get a little hinky. Than I am this Northwestern game. That's kind of where I'm at overall.
Yeah.
All right. So
on to November.
Yes, on to November for us here on our season preview podcast here on HawkCast. And while we have you, I'm going to remind you that we still got that 70% off deal going on. And it's a ton of great recruiting and football team focused content that only our premium subscribers get. You can do that today with code HawkCamp at sign up, or you can find one of those autofill links on any of our Twitters, on our website, and any of the free articles. And yeah, we want you over there. We want you to join us on our board, on our premium content. We'd love to have you. Don't miss this because this deal only comes around so often. It's kind of crazy. So let's move on to, like Ross said, move on to November and Wisconsin. And this is the part of the schedule that would probably make me more nervous about a loss than any of those aforementioned, probably Iowa State, Minnesota, and Northwestern, because Wisconsin, though I was not a fan of them being ranked in the top 25 last year, I think you start to see that vision going into this season. They were 7-6 in Luke Fickell's first year, who is a really good football coach, though trying to install the air raid isn't something that I would do in the Big Ten. He's trying. With Phil Longo there, they are ranked 15th in the AP poll and 17th in the coaches poll. Preseason 7th in the Big Ten, which has them behind Iowa in the Big Ten, but ahead of Iowa in the polls, in the top 25 polls, which is interesting. Of course, Hawkeyes went to Camp Randall last season with Deacon Hill and John Budmeyer's revenge game and won 15-6 over the Badgers. This one, I think, year 2 and 3 is where we start to figure out if that air raid is going to be something that works in the Big Ten for the Badgers. I think Luke Fickell's a good coach. I don't think Tyler Van Dyke is the solution for them in that air raid. He's another guy that is a decent enough quarterback at the college level. I don't think he's going to be even an NFL draft pick. I mean, he couldn't be successful at Miami, which, you know, not that a lot of quarterbacks have been successful at Miami in the last 10, 15 years, but I'm not I think this is, who was their quarterback last year that they brought in?
Tanner
Mordecai. I mean,
yeah.
Similar in my mind's eye. This isn't a scenario where I think Iowa is nervous about the air raid, but Wisconsin, on the other hand, they're a good football program. They got talent. They got the guys. I keep hearing about Xavier Lucas, who Iowa wanted really bad last year, and he ended up picking the Badgers. I keep hearing about him from camp up there in I guess it's in Platteville for camp for them. But they've got the talent, and I really do think this one comes down to scheme, because I don't think Phil Parker is going to be losing any sleep over the air raid.
No, I don't think so, especially because Mordecai, at the very least, had that element of mobility out of the pocket. And you look at Van Dyke's production, if he's able to move out of the pocket with any regularity, he never showed it at Miami, ever. So with Iowa basically able to know that he is one-dimensional, not necessarily the Wisconsin offense, but certainly their QB is one-dimensional, that takes some responsibilities off the board for guys like Sebastian Castro, for Jay Higgins, Nick Jackson, etc. So it's not necessarily going to be easier to defend the Badgers, but you look at Van Dyke and Eliot, like you said, he was never really the guy at Miami. I think you'd have to go back to Teddy Bridgewater to answer your question in terms of guys that really made it work down there. Oh no, wait, he was Louisville anyway. He prepped in Miami. Yeah,
he's right. This is new
Miami
to me.
Wanted him. Yeah. So you'll have to go back and certainly further than that. But by and large, let's also shout out brand new offensive line coach AJ Blazik. Some of our older Iowa fans are going to remember that name. He was the center at Iowa. I think he was Kirk Ferentz's first center, and he had been a JUCO transfer in to Iowa City back then in '99 or 2000 or so. Fun little sidebar anecdote about Blazik. But when I was my first year at Iowa, I was down at the field house playing pickup ball, and a bunch of the football players came in, and Blazik was one of them, and they were just shooting around. They were just having fun. And at one point, about halfway through the little game that we were playing, Blazik's like, "Where's the oxygen? Where's the oxygen?" Like, he was kidding, but like in the gassed offensive lineman kind of way, like he actually probably did need it. But it's been cool to see him really rise up through the coaching ranks. I wonder if there's some sort of scenario where he ends up in Iowa City, maybe not even coaching for Ferentz necessarily, but The fact that he's made his way to Madison as offensive line coach this year, I really like Jack Nelson. I really like Riley Mallman at those tackle spots. That's going to be a real challenge for this Iowa defensive front. So I think there's going to have to be a little bit of creativity on defense to, maybe scheme some ways to get to Van Dyke at QB. I think they're going to have to really disguise coverages because there's a real chance that this secondary is going to have to be, covering for 3, 4, 5 seconds, and that's sort of the point where you can't just say, "Well, yay, coverage sack." You got to get past those bookends first. So this to me does pose a challenge for the Hawkeyes. Again, as they're built, is this the Deontay Craig game? Is this the Ethan Herkett game? This is an opportunity for them to really prove themselves against NFL caliber talent. Even though they lost Nolan Rucci to Penn State, they're still fine to tackle. So, we saw what Iowa did against this offense last year, though. We saw them give, it turned into 6 points for the Badgers. I don't think Iowa's holding them to 6 this year, too. But I don't really think that anything about this air raid, I don't really think anything about Van Dyke, who threw 12 interceptions last year. That was a career high for him. I think you can force him into mistakes. I think you can force him into bad reads. And even if even if the tackles are keeping him upright more often than I think most offenses that Iowa faces this year are going to be able to do. So it's going to be a different blueprint to win this game, especially for that Hawkeye defense. But there isn't really game-breaking talent on the Badgers offense. So I think it's a different sort of idea, but I think it's still going to be doable. But this is going to be a very, very competitive game. And I think it's going to stay close for 60 minutes.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you there, Adam. Although I do wonder if, sometimes you hear people talk about or coaches talk about, well, maybe analysts more than coaches, but kind of like a scheduled loss. And when you look at the schedule for Wisconsin here, this is in a tough spot for them. They play 6 straight games between bye weeks. Iowa's the 6th of those. They have 4 of those 6 are on the road. And this game comes right after a home game against Penn State. So it does feel like there's a lot of factors schedule-wise not working in their favor for this game, which could be to Iowa's benefit. So interested to see how that plays out if it has a factor. But, Eliot brought up the Minnesota game a little bit ago in our discussion, and last year's Minnesota game. And this is the game on this schedule that kind of most feels like it could go that way this year in terms of just, 2 just deer butting heads against each other and just not much happening. A lot of defense, some real struggles on offense.
Deer.
I don't know. I'm running out of animals here. All right. Like bulls, I guess. We're playing for a bull in this one, right? I guess
yeah, there you go.
I mean, deer, I don't know. You know what? Let's just move on. No, this is not zoology with the Hawkeye Beacon guys. Yeah, I'm not as all that concerned about the air raid with Wisconsin until, evidence proves otherwise. Van Dyke, little error prone, doesn't seem like a huge upgrade on Tanner Mordecai. But, Iowa's offense too is obviously not in a position where we can not even have a ton of confidence, have a little confidence in it right now. We're still, I think, searching for that to see it on the field. So it does feel like this comes down to defense, as it often does in Iowa and Wisconsin games. Iowa should have a great defense. Wisconsin's defense doesn't look too shabby itself. And, they match up against an Iowa offense that may not be able to, exploit weaknesses very well. So this really comes down to one of those just, a really hard-hitting game, I think. It's been the norm in this series. Comes down to some big plays on defense, maybe a broken play on offense, a special teams play. This one comes down to just the little things, in my opinion.
Like that one Le'Shawn Williams crazy, whatever, like 70-yard run last
Right.
year.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
he breaks out for a 70-yard run in that game last year. Out of the blue. Yeah, I think something like that is the deciding factor again this year. I'll lean Iowa in terms of picking a winner here because it is at Kinnick. And I think the Iowa defense is the strongest unit in this game. So that, gives me a little confidence there. But overall, this is a game that right now, if you told me Wisconsin ended up winning it, I would not be shocked by that outcome for sure.
I lean the way of Iowa because of the air raid, to tell you the truth. I mean, they essentially refused to run the ball with Braylon Allen last year, and when they did, Cooper DeJean or Sebastian Castro blew it the hell up.
Yeah. I think ultimately it's just going to come down to, can Iowa's offensive line neutralize the playmakers that Wisconsin has up front? This John Pius kid that they got from William and Mary, he was an absolute machine in FCS last year. And yeah, it is different in the Big Ten than it is at FCS, but this is going to be the big challenge for Mason Richmond or Jennings Dunker or whoever. Like they can probably move Pius around and try to find some bad matchups, but ultimately, it does seem that if there is a weak spot on Iowa's offensive line, I'm not trying to call anybody out in particular here, but historically, it's been, especially in the last few years, it's been on those edges. So, can Iowa keep its quarterbacks upright in this game? Because if so, Wisconsin's pass defense is not what it used to be, and I'm not sure that they take that step back up this year. So if you keep your quarterback upright, I think Iowa's really got a chance here. But again, this is one of those like 55, 60% sort of things. So I think Iowa should be slightly favored, but this is going to be a really tough game. And I think it's going to come down to, a play here, a play there, a ball bouncing a certain way. So this is, I think, to me, as close of a 50-50 game as there is on Iowa's schedule.
8-1.
Begrudgingly, but yes.
Yeah.
Sure.
Same. How many of these games, before we move on to UCLA, which that's going to be a tough one, we could see a Wisconsin, a Northwestern, an Iowa State being a loss?
Michigan State, I think is, it's lower than those, but it's a plausible loss at this
because
point.
of Aiden Childs.
Yeah, and because of what we saw, Maliava do to Iowa last year.
Right.
Like that, there's your proof of concept right there. But I think Iowa should win that game.
There's just too much. I mean, the players around Childs aren't the players that were around Iamaliava, right?
Yeah.
So, and Iamaliava, I think, was a top 5 prospect in his class for us, whereas Childs is just a run-of-the-mill 4-star, Iowa gets them all. Okay, so 8-1 heading into UCLA on a Friday night in California at 8 p.m. Central Time. That is a lot of things that gives me pause. They're also not a team. They are a team with a new head coach in Deshaun Foster, who had a disastrous debut at Big Ten Media Days. They are picked to finished 15th in the Big Ten, went 8-5 last year. I think I already said that, but they did not have the roster turnover like a Michigan State, like a Washington. I do believe they bring a lot of those players back that were impactful last season. And as much as Deshaun Foster struggled at Big Ten Media Days, I think he has a chance to be a pretty good coach. He was a really good running back in the league for the Panthers, however long ago that was. And what are all these factors? It's on a Friday. It's a short week. It's in California, where Kirk and the Hawkeyes have routinely struggled. And it's a team that they're not really familiar with, which could go one way or another. This is where I start to feel more so iffy than maybe I did about the other ones. I might put Wisconsin and UCLA in kind of the similar phase. But then again, Wisconsin, I lean back on the air raid. So I may be even less confident in this UCLA game than I am in the others, because they are going out west. It is it is a short week, and then they've got a bye week the following week before they go to Maryland. But this would be the one I'm going to be pretty nervous about going into for Iowa.
Yeah. I'm in the same boat. We've mentioned, could Iowa be a trap game from Ohio State? Well, I don't know about that, but could this be a trap game for Iowa? I would say 100%. All those factors Eliot cited, not good. Iowa on the road on the West Coast hasn't been a great time out there. Iowa on a Friday night on a short week, don't love that. Iowa against an opponent they have zero familiarity with. They got no film to look at. Well, I mean, they'll have 9 games of film of the season to look at, but they don't have that experience playing them, knowing what to expect from the Bruins on the field, and drawing on that. Obviously, that cuts both ways. They don't have any familiarity playing Iowa, so that's beneficial for the Hawkeyes, but definitely a lot of red flags for this game. And this is before Iowa's bye week. So, I kind of mentioned that scheduled loss last week with Wisconsin in terms of, playing a ton of games and, then getting a bye week. Iowa's kind of in that boat for this game. They've got several games in a row. Then the bye week after this, road game Friday night. Eric, they've got a new coach. Eric Bieniemy is the offensive coordinator there. Wildly overqualified to be a college offensive coordinator. I mean, he was winning Super Bowls with the Kansas City Chiefs last year. Was he still there last year?
He was with the Commanders.
Oh, okay. Well, a couple years before that, he was doing it. So, extremely good offensive coordinator, albeit obviously there's no Patrick Mahomes on this UCLA roster. So, that will help Iowa. But, there's a lot of question marks for me in this one. Adam, are you make Eliot and I feel better about this game, please?
I'm not sure I can do that. And here's the thing. Bieniemy is a big part of that. And when we talked to Tim Lester at Media Day, one of his comparisons that he was talking about pace and tempo of offensive line. And you can do pace, you can do tempo even when you're huddling. And a big part of that, and he cited the Kansas City Chiefs, and he said, they huddle, then they get to the line, they run their motion, and they go. And like the huddle is just for you to basically catch your breath. And he compared it to Oregon. And trying to keep up with that like super high powered, super high octane offense. And of course, Bieniemy knows how to do that. And so he's walking into a situation where he's returning 4 offensive linemen from last year. He's got TJ Harden, he's got Keenan Jones running the ball. And, they've got really talented receivers there too. So this, I think, is going to be the toughest test of the season at that point. Maybe, obviously aside from Ohio State, which is, sort of the Babe Ruth of this entire schedule. But beyond the Buckeyes, I think this is going to be the toughest test for Iowa's defense, just because they're going up against a guy who, again, wildly overqualified to be a Big Ten offensive coordinator. Clearly, there's some like a good relationship with Deshaun Foster there. Eliot, when we were at Big Ten Media Days, and he was like, "Well, it's in Los Angeles," I genuinely thought he was just doing a bit. Like, I think I laughed. I was like, "Oh, this guy's funny," and then like nothing. It's like, "Oh no." So
I was working on something else, so it had my like peripheral attention. I was like, I remember looking at you and being like, and then going back to what I was doing, and it just blew up on Twitter. I didn't even think about it possibly blowing up. I just thought he was having a hard time, and we were doing our work. But yeah, I definitely remember that.
Yeah, it was weird. It was weird, but yeah, this is going to be a difficult matchup, a fast-paced matchup, even if they're huddling. Because again, I assume that there's going to be a lot of aspects that they bring from that Chiefs attack, even though they're obviously not bringing Pat Mahomes with them. That would be illegal. That would be instant, the NCAA would have to step in at that point for a lot of
I
reasons.
think
But
you'd have to give him the death penalty at that point. I don't think there's any question.
yeah, just blatant cheating. But they brought in a ton of guys from the transfer portal into the secondary. Do those guys mesh well enough that Iowa or that they're going to give Iowa some problems by mid-November? Plausible. It's absolutely plausible at that point. So, this is going to be, I think, if anything, the fact that this is a Friday game and not a Saturday game, so you've got that short work week to deal with. I think it might play into Iowa's favor just because of how much familiarity the Hawkeyes have with their coaches. With Iowa's whole system has been in place for longer than UCLA's. They play Friday games every year. They're used to doing this with Nebraska. So this is not going to be as much of a departure from the norm for them as it usually is for most programs, and certainly for programs that are still gelling and getting these situations together. So yeah, I think it plays a little bit into Iowa's hands, but this again is another one of those like as close to 50-50 as possible for me. And if the Bruins enter this game favored, won't be that much of a surprise to me. So yeah, this is going to be pretty difficult, Eliot.
There are a couple ways I could talk myself into the Iowa winning this game. First thing, UCLA is also on a short week. They travel to Nebraska on November 2nd, and then they come back and play at home.
I think they have Nebraska at home.
I have the schedule right in front of me.
Oh, well, my schedule is wrong then. Sorry.
Okay. They travel to Nebraska, play at Lincoln November 2nd, and then they come home and play Iowa there in Pasadena. They do have a bye week prior to Nebraska, so that's kind of an advantage their way. They get to sleep in their own beds, all that. Prior to that, they play Rutgers, but this might be at a situation where UCLA, I mean, their attendance for their games was not good last year. I don't know if you guys remember that. The videos of the stadium virtually empty. So this might be a situation where Iowa just goes and, Iowa fans might make LA second home for the Hawkeyes that weekend. They get to go on a vacation. I remember we were talking about our plan for the season, and Adam said, I'll bite the bullet. I'll go. I imagine some fans are feeling the same way of like, I get to go to Los Angeles in November. Let's do it. Let's make a trip out of it.
Not only Los Angeles, they get to go to the Rose Bowl. Yeah, exactly.
So,
and a lot cheaper than going to, I mean, it's not the real Rose Bowl, but it's a lot cheaper to go to a UCLA game there than the real Rose Bowl.
Right. Not only that, they play LSU in their non-con. That's a loss. They play Oregon. They play Penn State. Those are three more or less guaranteed losses for UCLA.
Back to back to back.
Yes. Yeah. All three of those games. Yeah. LSU. Yeah, exactly. There's no bye week in there. It's back. It's 3 straight weeks of probable losses. The other thing is there's been stories about Eric Bieniemy rubbing some people the wrong way. And if he really feels like he's overqualified in this role and Deshaun Foster's in his first year as head coach, maybe some tension there. So I could talk myself into an Iowa win here. Would it shock me if they lost? This might be where I pick Iowa's second loss here of the season. And I think that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah, and for me, asking me this now in August versus asking me this in October, I could have a very different answer.
Yep.
If the factors you just mentioned, Eliot, like if UCLA season, if the wheels are kind of getting pretty wobbly after they have some bad losses, there's some, tension in the coaching staff, et cetera. And, by that point, we're going to have a good sense of this Iowa offense under Tim Lester, the passing game, the quarterbacks, hopefully, I think by November, McNamara or Sullivan, somebody's looking better. Like I could definitely talk myself into, Iowa looking a lot better, having a lot better opportunity in this game than right now where, these factors about the short week, West Coast, et cetera, et cetera. So, I feel like it's a better loss or a more likely loss for Iowa right now. I definitely think that if the season plays out a certain way, I could feel very differently about this game in 2 months.
Are we taking this as
Yeah,
a loss? This is going to be at this point in time, again, all things considered, this could be a loss. And I think this is where I'm going to count Iowa's second loss.
Yeah, I think at the very least, I don't think I was getting past this one at 9-1. So, whether it happens here or not, I think they're just not quite consistent enough, or there really isn't a reason to expect them to be consistent enough to be 9-1, which I think at this point in the season would get them, knocking on the door of the playoff. So, fingers crossed on that front. But I think 8-2 at this point in the year is probably the best to expect from them. Because, this is, like I said before, as close to a 50-50 game in my eyes as they have on the entire schedule.
Whether it's UCLA or Northwestern or Wisconsin, just to reiterate that point.
Yep.
All right.
Agreed.
They are 8-2 heading into this game at Maryland on November 23rd. They've got a bye week the week of the 16th, the weekend of the 16th. So 2 bye weeks in a season. That's probably going to be beneficial for them. Going from West Coast to East Coast as well. You get that week, sleep in your own bed, then you go out there to Maryland and play in College Park. I've heard some folks talking positively about Maryland. I mean, to me, this is a program that is continually A-okay with going 8-5, 7-6. They lose their starter in Taulia Tagovailoa. I'm not a believer in the Terps. I think this could possibly be another one of those games where Iowa travels out east and wins. What was it a few years ago when they beat Maryland at Maryland? They beat the hell out of them. I think 6 turnovers in that game for the Iowa.
Yeah,
defense.
that was like 50-10, and that was absurd.
Right. I mean, I'm not saying that I see that as happening, but it's a possibility.
Yeah, I think so. And I think losing Tagovailoa is a really, really tough blow. If anything, somehow, I think he was underappreciated in College Park because he's the best QB they've had since probably their ACC days. And I'm not a huge believer in Mike Locksley at this point, just because we've seen some real stinker clunker years out of him too.
Because he hired Brian Ferentz as an analyst.
Well, there is that as well. So to that end, though, I think it's going to be really interesting how they use Brian, because the key unit to me for the Terps is their offensive line. Ton of transfer portal guys, not a ton of depth behind them. So if that starting 5 is healthy, stays healthy all the way through, there's a chance that they gel into something that could, keep sustaining that attack, keep that offense going, because they've got the skill position guys there still. If those injuries start to, pile up, and again, we're talking about the end of the year, we're talking about November, and which sorts of teams have injuries that really hamper their seasons by mid-November. All of them, right? You got to roll double sixes to have a fully healthy offensive line by the 11th game of the season, of the regular season. So it's going to be really interesting to see what sort of shape the Terrapins are in at this point in the year, where their injuries are, and to that extent, same goes for Iowa, right? Like at the very least, I think Iowa at pretty much all of the key positions, except for maybe defensive line, I think they've got enough depth, use your words, to combat a loss or like an injury loss here or there. I'm not quite sure that Maryland has that across the board yet too, but I think it really is going to come down to, or at the very least, we will know by the start of November. I think we'll have a much better sense of how well Iowa does or doesn't match up against these guys. But as it stands on paper right now, it's going to be really interesting to see. The Maryland defense is still pretty nasty. They like to make big plays. They like to attack. And so it's going to be another challenge to keep Iowa's quarterbacks upright in this game. But, ultimately, it's really going to come down to, is that offensive line healthy? Is Billy Edwards that guy at quarterback? He's a question mark until he's not. And so we'll see. We'll see. I think, again, Iowa probably wins this. I think it's more in Iowa's favor than, say, UCLA is. But we now know that Maryland and Loxley know how to string some wins together. And again, it's going to be in Maryland. So this is going to be a challenge, guys, I think.
Yeah, I think this game for Iowa is going to come down to protecting the ball first and foremost. Maryland's defense was pretty good, very good, really, at the takeaway game last year. They had 17 interceptions. When they had multiple takeaways in a game, they went 5-0 last year, 11-2 since 2020 with that stat. So when they force turnovers, they have been very successful. When they are not able to force turnovers, definitely much less success. So this is an important game for Cade. They're all important games for Cade to take care of the ball, but this one especially. And but that defense also bringing in a lot of new faces, a lot of turnover from last year. Adam already mentioned, turnover at the quarterback position. Tua's little brother was the best quarterback they've had since, I don't know, Boomer Esiason, maybe. You can
He
make
was
the
good.
argument.
He was really good.
I didn't even
Iowa
know.
made him look silly a few
I
times, but he was good.
didn't even know Boomer Esiason went to Maryland. So you learn something new every day.
He did, didn't he, Adam?
Yeah, I'm 90% sure. I also don't have it in front of me to confirm, but yeah, that
I
sounds
think
right.
so. We're gonna go with it. Either way, there's a lot of turnover. We're doing it live. There's a lot of turnover on the Maryland team. Iowa is, we'll see where things are at this point in the season in terms of health, in terms of the progress that certain units have made. Looking at you, quarterbacks and offensive line, but this does feel like a game where Phil Parker, this is the Phil Parker special to me. Like, he's going to have them geared up for this game to, I think, really shut down what Maryland's going to want to do on offense. And then it's a matter of, how many turnovers can they force again? Eliot mentioned the game out in DC a couple of years ago. Iowa forced a slew of turnovers, 6, I believe, like you said. And then the offense, take care of the ball. And this is another game where the running game, the offensive line, if they can kind of impose their will, it feels like a really good opportunity for Iowa to get a pretty solid win here. Eliot, what you got?
Looking at Maryland's schedule. Okay, I'm going from top to bottom because this is really interesting. Back half loaded. First game, UConn, then it's Michigan State, then at Virginia, then Villanova, then at Indiana, then Northwestern. I would not be flabbergasted if Maryland started the season 6-0. I would also not be flabbergasted if their latter half of the season they went 0-6, because then they've got USC, they're at Minnesota, they're at Oregon, they've got Rutgers, who has a real possibility of going like 8-4, 7-5, even 9-3 maybe, depending on their schedule. And then they've got Iowa, and then they're at Penn State. It would not shock me if they go 6-0 and then 0-6 and be one of these anomalies of the college football season. So I'm taking the Hawks. I think they're 9-2 at this point.
Me as well. And also, I would like to confirm Boomer Esiason did in fact go to Maryland. So we are not spreading fake news on the HawkCast.
A turtle named Boomer.
All righty. So moving into this final game of the season, of course, the day after Thanksgiving, Black Friday, Nebraska, who was 5-7 last season, looked like they were going to be bowl bound for the first time in a hot second, and then lost a bunch of games at the end of the year. Very turnover prone. They are picked to finish 8th in the Big Ten in that Cleveland.com poll. They are receiving votes somehow. 16 in the AP and 2 in the coaches, it's because they're Nebraska. That's the only reason, literally the only reason. Of course, Iowa won 13-10 last year in a slugfest. Shout out to Marshall Meter. Now, the one thing that I will say gives me pause in this one is Dylan Raiola, who I believe he was the #1 recruit in the country. I need to verify that with us. I know he was a 5-star quarterback, previously committed to Georgia, flips to Nebraska and posts this poem that was definitely written by AI, which was just odd. And he is definitely going to be their starting quarterback. I've heard everything about him being legit, and you would much rather face this guy in week 4 than in your last week of the season, week 14 or whatever it is, because he will have had a bunch of time to be the starting quarterback for the Cornhuskers. And of course, last season, Iowa faced one of these 5-star quarterbacks in Nico Iamaleava, who was just a freshman. And that was my talking point in our podcast, our preview podcast with Ryan Sylvia from Vol Report, where I said, oh, Iowa's going to win. They're facing a freshman quarterback. So I was very wrong, and I will not make that mistake again. Now, Dylan Raiola isn't, surrounded by the same talent as Nico was last year at Tennessee, but he is legit, and he probably will be for a few years at Nebraska. I like Matt Rule. Second year under Matt Rule is usually where they start to figure things out. At least that's what his track record is. So this one definitely gives me pause as well. Of course, Nebraska went into Kinnick a few years ago and beat them in that, was it Trey Palmer? Is that the receiver who went nuts in that game?
Yeah, and they can thank the concussion that Cooper DeJean had in that one, and TJ Hall's relative inexperience. And Hall's a lot better now. So
right.
at the very least, that weak spot, at the very least, that particular type of one, not quite there this year. So there's that.
Right. But Dylan Raiola traveling to Iowa City for this game, that's the thing that gives me pause, if anything. And Matt Rule being in year 2.
Yeah, I am in the same boat as you, Eliot. Year 2 for Matt Rule does tend to be where he makes the jump. This is year 2 for him at Nebraska. And, Raiola, if he is anything like the hype suggests, will be the best quarterback Nebraska has had in, I don't want to date myself, but let's say a long time. So that makes the Huskers, and we've seen, some questionable Husker teams in recent years have given Iowa some absolute dogfights in that Black Friday game. Like, there has not been an easy one for the Hawkeyes for several years. Now, aside from the game 2 years ago in Kinnick, the bounces have clearly gone Iowa's way. Shouts to Ethan Hurkett and Marshall Meter last year. Shouts to Keith Duncan, who destroyed Nebraska. Shouts to Miguel Racinos, right? Is that?
Yep.
Yep. And yeah, so this is definitely just, we talked about earlier, long time ago in this pod now, the chippiest games on the schedule. This is going to be up there. Iowa, Nebraska. It's become, Nebraska didn't want it to be a rivalry when they joined the Big Ten and they made this game. Sorry, it is. You hate us. Iowa fans don't like you. I know that much. And the player, that's mutual on the players on the field. I don't know if it is as much on the coaching staff, especially with Scott Frost gone. I don't know that Kirk Ferentz has a great deal of animosity towards Matt Rule at this point. But this is just going to be 60 minutes of just brutality, in my opinion. And I'm concerned for Iowa's chances because there's some real weapons on that Nebraska team, starting with Raiola first and foremost. Adam, what do you make of this one?
Yeah, Raiola is obviously the sort of centerpiece here, but also he's just one guy, and this is going to be at the end of the season. So if he's dinged up at all, does Nebraska have that talent behind him, sort of the way that they were depending on Chubba Purdy and his merry gang of guys who wouldn't start at pretty much any other Big Ten school at QB last year. So, it's always a question mark until a game like this comes, the day after Thanksgiving. Everything I said about injuries in the UCLA or Maryland game, also applies here, of course. What this one's going to come down to is how diverse can how diverse can Nebraska make their offense? Because if they're putting this all on Dylan, then that means that their run game isn't clicking. And we know that they've got a lot of guys that they trust both on the offensive line and then in the backfield too. Gabe Irvin is probably the highest profile of them, but, Ramir Johnson, Dante Dowdell, those sorts of guys. They've got the dudes back there, and they've got some dudes at wide receiver too. So how healthy is Iowa going to be coming into this? Does that secondary, still have the bodies and the juice to, really put some clamps down? Because ultimately what has gotten Iowa into trouble in these games against Nebraska is not turnovers. It's not, easy scores for the Huskers. It's been sustained drives. And for as much as Iowa, prides itself on the defense, on the ball hawks, on getting opposing offenses off the field, it seems more often than not at this point that by the end of the season, Nebraska's like, all right, here's a 70-yard drive. Here's 75. Here's 8, right? Like they're able to start to, move the ball both through the air and on the ground against the Hawkeyes. And some of that is, the talent that they're able to recruit to Nebraska, which somehow I don't know how with their recent lack of winning success and the fact that these kids were not alive when Scott Frost was, or to say nothing of Tommy Frazier, were there at QB. Somehow they still have this weird mental sorcery over high school kids and high school coaches that they're able to bring in 4 stars pretty much across the board. And, it hasn't really translated into wins quite yet. This, especially with Matt Rule being in year 2, it sort of feels like, I don't want to say fun's over necessarily, because Nebraska has to prove it first, right? They have to prove it. And there's been so many Augusts where you're like, this is the year, Huskers are back. They're great at winning August national championships and August Big Ten championships, division championships, what have you. They have to actually go and prove it. And I think they've got the dudes to be competitive. Their schedule's tough, guys. And so how healthy are they going to be coming into this game? How healthy is Iowa going to be coming into this game? Can Phil Parker actually put some clamps down on the Husker offenses, especially before the 4th quarter, which is usually when Iowa's been making these comebacks when they do beat the Huskers often. So, this is, again, I agree with you guys, going to be a chippy game. It's going to be a physical, talented game. I think it's going to be a single possession game either way. And, you talk about these 50-50 games, depending on how, healthy Raiola is, how his development has gone. It wouldn't surprise me if the way the season progresses that Nebraska would be favored coming into this. But also, again, said it before, they have to start proving it. And they have to stop making the really dumb mistakes that have plagued them for year after year after year after year. And would it surprise me if this turns into another sort of like brain dead Nebraska year? No, because that's really been the norm for them going back to God knows how long. maybe going back to the Bo Pelini years. And even then they were losing games in dumb ways. It just didn't happen as often. So yeah, this is going to be a real challenge, and a real challenge. And, we said before, they've got to have their pad strapped on tight. If things are breaking well for Nebraska for, again, the first time in over a decade, it would not shock me if the Huskers are favored even by like a touchdown at this point in the season, because it's the end of the year and all of that, freshman jitters for Raiola would be gone out the window by now. But that's a best case scenario. And there's so much variability in how the Huskers are going to do that. We'll see how that actually translates onto the field.
So
Yeah.
correct myself quickly here. Dylan Raiola was the number 2 prospect in the 24 class. He was behind Jeremiah Smith. And I also said Aaron Noland was the quarterback transfer from Alabama's Julian Sayin. So correct myself on both of those fronts. The other thing is Nebraska's schedule is very much backloaded. I mean, it kind of similar to what I was saying about Maryland. They could start off probably going to be 5-2, maybe 4-3, 6-1, maybe. But they've got a fairly easy start of their schedule. UTEP, Colorado's going to suck. The hype, I hate it. I just want them to lose every game. I'm going to be rooting against them every game. Then they got UNI, go Cats. We'll see if they upset them. I doubt it. Illinois, Purdue, Rutgers, Indiana, and then it would not surprise me if they lose 4 out of their last 5 because they're at Ohio State. They've got UCLA at home. Then they're at USC. Then they've got Wisconsin at home. And then they're at Iowa. So the end of their schedule is brutal.
Yeah, I'm taking Iowa for a loss here, so taking Nebraska to win it. And that's not entirely because, I'm terrified of Nebraska or, definitely think they're going to win the game. But for me, I'm looking at it like I think 9-3 is the most likely record for Iowa at the end of the regular season at this point. And got to find those 3 losses somewhere right now. I think just as we've gone through all the factors so far and all the games, I think this could definitely end up being that 3rd loss. It's one of those things, though, that, once we see more about the season, once we see more about this Nebraska team, like Adam said, they got to prove it on the field. They got to actually go out, win the games they're supposed to, play like the team that they look like they can be on paper. Iowa, again, what does this offense actually look like in a real game? What does it look like in a real game in October, in November? Like what sort of progress is there for the Tim Lester offense over the course of this season? That is going to have a huge impact on how these games play out. And, if we do this exercise halfway through the season and we're picking, how the final 6 games go, we could have some very different, I think, projections from what we have now. But that's where I'm at is, I don't feel great about picking Nebraska to win this game. I never feel great about picking Nebraska to win. I'm not going to lie. But 9-3 is where I'm at. So that's my rationale.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if Iowa loses this game either. This is really the sort of, is this the difference between 9-3 and 10-2? There's an outside shot that Iowa's shot at a college football playoff berth is on the line here. And that Nebraska would love to play spoiler for the mighty Hawkeyes that are across the Missouri River. And, just say a sentence like that to somebody from Nebraska 25 years ago and see just like how angry that makes them. But it's the reality now. And that Iowa is going to be up for this one. But, things like motivation, things like stakes, they only matter so much when it really does come down to execution on the field. And, Nebraska in particular has a bunch of dudes in that front 7 on the defensive front, big dudes, fast dudes at linebacker. So it's going to be an extra challenge for that Iowa offensive line. And, what does the Iowa offensive line look like at the end of the season, right? Like, are they at full strength? How much have they really mastered the finer points of the Tim Lester offense again by the end of the season? Because we talk about seeing Raiola versus in week 4 versus at the end of the year. Kind of the same thing goes for Iowa and Tim Lester, right? The offense ostensibly should be better by the end of the year than it should be at the start of the Big Ten season. So there's, concurrent improvements over the year. One would hope for both of them. And so who has been improving faster? I mean, honestly, you kind of got to think that the 5-star QB is that guy. So It'll be really interesting to see. But I think, Ross, all things being equal, by the end of the year, I kind of think it is going to be a loss. So yeah, 9-3 wouldn't surprise me either.
Man, that's tough. It's predicting the future. And that's what future casts are for, nothing else. Okay. I'll be bullish on the Hawks. I'll take a win here. Of course, we shall see. I'm picking 10-2. Adam and Ross 9-3 at the end of the season. Of course, we shall see how things shake out. We could talk playoff possibility, but we have gone so long on this schedule preview. So we are going to wrap it up here. We appreciate you tuning into this episode of HawkCast and listening here with us till the very end, previewing the Iowa 2024 season and their schedule. Again, do not forget 70% off right now for your entire first year. Take advantage of that. Take advantage of us while we're running this deal. It's Hawk Camp at iowa.rivals.com. At sign up, you can find one of those autofill links on any of our Twitters, on the website, anywhere you want to sign up. Again, that is Hawk Camp, all capital letters. Get signed up today. Do not miss this deal. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit that subscribe. Make sure you hit that like and drop a comment. Let us know what you're thinking. Predicting Iowa's record. Are we wrong? Are we way off? Are they going to go 12-0 and somehow beat the Buckeyes in Columbus? Let us know down there in the comments. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. Drop a rate and review. It helps us out, and it does, of course, make us very happy. Once again, folks, I am Eliot Clough at Eliot Clough on Twitter, joined by Adam Jacoby and Ross Binder. And for now, we will see you next time.